Welcome to the Silver Creek Insights podcast. I'm your host, Felicia Wiley. Today, I'm joined by a leader whose career bridges the worlds of deep research, artificial intelligence, and product innovation. With us is Dr. Ross Turner, former academic researcher turned product and engineering executive, who has helped scale AI teams, launch data driven products, and shape the future of natural language generation. From pioneering early work in data to tech systems to building applied AI at scale across consultancies and startups, Ross brings a rare blend of technical depth and strategic product vision. Ross, welcome to the show.
Thank
To,
you. Great to be
to
here.
kick us off, glad to have you. What drew you to the world of research into leading product and engineering teams?
Yeah, great question. It's been a long time since I've been in research, but I was lucky enough to be sponsored by a company when I did my PhD. So that basically meant I had a dual goal of building a commercial product as well as doing academic research, right? So in my opinion, applied research is great because the implementation of your ideas has to be robust. I mean, that's super important. And you're not just developing your ideas in a bubble, right? So it's fantastic. So you're building something which is having real world use for end users. While at the same time, you're able to kind of test your ideas up for your research. So for me personally, the transition to product engineering, felt like a pretty natural next step.
No, I'm so happy that it sounds like it was very much aligned with what you're working to do, but what was the hardest mind shift moving to the industry and to product?
Right. So from that perspective, I mean, definitely the hardest shift would be timing, right? If you want to compare it to research, right? So actually having time to think. And then there's this saying around like perfection is the enemy of good. Okay. So
Mm.
in the research world, you're trying to be extremely thorough, applying the scientific method. And then when you hit the commercial world, of course, there's deadlines, there's targets that need to be hit, product market fit, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the biggest shift, right? And a lot of the time in the commercial world, like timing is everything, right? So
No, and I'm certain you probably experienced this where companies are trying to figure out like what products to ship. So they just ship, and then they try to figure out the actual market fit after. Have you experienced that?
um yeah, I mean for sure, right? So I think if you look at it from being sales led versus product led, there's problems in both, right? So if you're really sales led, there's different incentives at play, right?
Mhm.
People have, individuals also have their own targets they need to hit. There's quarterly reporting you need to do if you're a public company, of course. On the product led side, yeah, there's the whole saying around, you've probably heard this before, is build it and they will come. This whole idea that you just build something and users will magically appear. So there's no really um, single best approach, really. Generally, it's a hybrid. You're trying to meet sales targets or growth targets, right? And it's really about being able to have an environment where you can experiment and iterate fast, especially now with all the advances in automation and AI that are coming up.
Do you think that the tech industry undervalues deep research when hiring for leadership roles?
I'm not sure right now with the kind of money that's being offered to researchers, right? Especially in the last month or so. Um, I think there's definitely a different mindset. I don't think they undervalue it. I think it's about creating the right innovation environment and innovation framework to foster it, right? So my experience now when I speak to people at innovation labs is there's generally teams there that can, their job is to experiment and innovate. And then you have, the more deployment focused teams, right? So when an idea has traction, they can get it to market quickly. And yeah, I think they're trying to not be too siloed in this approach, but definitely, the dedicated teams to get things into production once something is proven to be working. Really taking it from POC. Okay, you've seen that you've got market fit now. Okay, let's scale it. So I think there's definitely the organizational and technical things in place in a lot of organizations to be able to do that quite quickly now.
And taking a step back and more so focusing on you. So you studied natural language generation before large language models like really became mainstream. How do you can you to walk us through like that shift from your perspective?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows, like, what was it, November 2022, when kind of Chat GPT kind of changed the world for a lot of people. I think um, language models have been around for a long time, and it's kind of statistical methods for text generation as well have been around. I think what would be the shift be? I think in the early days of data to text systems, there were a lot of templated knowledge, content, and facts that would need to go into reports. So everything had to be very narrow domain, right? So in the early days, weather forecast systems, robo journalism around sports reporting, these kind, and then BI, kind of augmenting BI dashboards with text was kind of a big niche use case for these systems. Um, I think the shift to LLMs came really when, okay, this is something you could put in the hands of, non-technical business users. I think, and it was up until, even like, prior to ChatGPT, it was still fairly technical savvy business users that were using natural language generation technology. Um, and then all of a sudden, great, you can put this in the hands of, what you'd almost call citizen developers, or even just completely non-technical people. So that was a massive shift. So all of a sudden, you had kind of general purpose text generation, right? And there's a lot of problems that brings along as well, right? Because before it was very, use case specific, vertical specific. Accuracy was always crucial, 100% accuracy, especially for more mission critical use cases, like, finance type use cases, etc. To all of a sudden having that general purpose text generator. So that was pretty huge.
Yeah, how would you say that shift from symbolic AI to deep learning has impacted reliability and control?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people are still seeing the issues. Everybody talks about hallucinations with LLMs. I think there are subtle variations of hallucinations out there as well. Things like, omission of detail, wrong attribution, right? And what do I mean by that? Let's say you're describing some data set and it just leaves out some key facts that would normally be in a standard report, or some piece of input data is wrongly attributed to, some reference entity in the output. Um, and with large language models, it's sometimes hard to spot because it's so fluent and it always reads so well, right? Um, Whereas in the past, there was always a very careful crafting of rules and, grammar, etc., etc. So I think that's a big difference. I think it's probably a problem that a lot of end users of large language models, I think they're aware of it, but they're maybe not totally aware of the subtleties, especially when it comes to describing numerical data.
No, it definitely makes sense, and seems like you're hinting at potential, slightly like potential like ethical implications of like auto-generated languages. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think again it depends on the use case, as I already mentioned. So I think in kind of more B2C use cases, probably less mission critical. It's not so um, important if the output is not always 100% accurate, right? Okay, there's ethical considerations. I don't know if somebody's converting or buying a product or something based on wrong information. Yes, that's not as bad as making a mistake in a in a legal report or something that's being I don't know read in pharmaceuticals or healthcare. Um, I think personally, I don't know if you've heard of this whole neurosymbolic approach to AI. The kind of term is fallen out of fashion a little bit, but the whole idea is, really delegating a lot of the computation to a business logic component and then bringing the input back to the LLM, right? So any calculations are kind of deferred to another software component to kind of classical software. And that's the idea being let's try and reduce the amount of hallucinations, etc., that are in the output.
You've led remote teams, nearshore teams, in-house teams. What is one surprising advantage of nearshoring that most leaders overlook?
So why focus on nearshoring? I guess with nearshoring teams, I guess there is a lot of less politics.
Less politics. What do you mean by
Right.
that?
Well, I mean, it kind of comes from the relationship with the team, right? So you were talking like, okay, in-house teams, right? Everybody's working for the same company, right? You're all in the same employment contract. But then nearshore team, obviously, there's like a business transaction. They're coming in to do a specific project, right? And then potentially they might leave again, right? And either
Yeah.
over the project. So there's more of a service mindset with the nearshore teams, and I think that leads to probably more focus on execution sometimes, right? When sometimes when you're growing an in-house team, there might be some element of you know politics and relationships that come into play, which aren't there with a nearshore team.
And then what about working remotely in remote teams? Like, what's your take on remote work in the industry? You can see it as still beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think some companies do it very well. Um, right? I believe GitHub is completely remote, right? These
And
type,
remote, yeah.
yeah, and they seem to be very, very good at it. I mean, personally, Um, I've done it remote work in some shape or form since around 2009, 2010, right? Um, I don't know. I have a strong feeling for face to face interactions. Um, I think that's always beneficial. Like 100% remote work, sometimes when you haven't met a lot of your colleagues in person before and had that ability to have a kind of face to face rapport with them,
Yeah.
I think that's quite challenging, if I'm honest. Um, but I think it's really a lot of it's also down to kind of personal preference, right? I mean, if you're in a busy household trying to work from home all the time, although that's slightly different to remote work, but it might not suit you as well as somebody that's maybe single and you're happy to be by the beach and etc. So I think it's a difficult topic. I think offsites definitely help. If your company can do offsites, once a quarter or once a half year, etc. I think that definitely helps to get that kind of rapport and the team building together.
So you spent nearly a decade researching data to text generation before it was mainstream. What do people still get wrong about um, natural language generation today?
Um, I'm not sure that people get anything wrong. I think just the formalization in people's minds, and especially the wider public now it's so mainstream, is changed. So I think the original formulation from a more academic perspective was there was this field of natural language processing. That was a subfield of artificial intelligence. And then kind of within natural language processing, you could almost kind of cut it into two. So one side is kind of natural language understanding, where you're going from some language input into data. And then the other side is kind of natural language generation, when you're going from some non-linguistic input, right, to linguistic output, right, whether that be text generation or text to speech, etc. So that was always the kind of academic formalization. And then it was focused specifically on natural language generation. I think that half of NLP received less commercial attention than natural language understanding did for quite some time. Um, but now, with the kind of advent of generative AI and large language models, text generation is huge. And I think, if you went onto like a trend analysis on Google, like Google Trends, and looked for the keywords natural language generation versus text generation, text generation would be way up here and NLG would be way down. So I don't think anybody gets anything wrong about NLG. It's just still it's a vibrant research topic. I think just text generation. I wouldn't say people think it's a solved problem, but it's definitely now become a commonplace use case for millions of millions and billions of people across the world now. So
So instead of saying what people get wrong, what is something where you wish they knew?
I think probably what if I wish they knew.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that probably worries me the most at the moment is a lot of the outputs that people are generating through whatever large language model it is now. Um, Generally, people are pretty acceptant of the output, right? Right? You generally always get, oh, that looks really good and reads really well. But sometimes if you really kind of go through it thoroughly, there are issues. And yeah, I think these issues will be ironed out over time, but specifically when you're kind of generating text from input data, and data literacy and whatever comes into play, I think that's can be an issue.
I completely agree because in terms of the tech generation, if you really do carefully read through some of like ChatGPT for the case of this argument, outputs, normally when you're reading something and you have to respond, you answer the question using the language of the person who asked you that. Then the next paragraph, you're going to explain, and then there's conclusion. So, especially in like academia papers, introduction, organized argument, conclusion. But if you read some of ChatGPT's outputs, there's the conclusion, it has like some of the intro part, and a conclusion is repeated in the same exact word in the middle, and it kind of sort of like extrapolates, like it just it extrapolates the point, but the point was already talked about, discussed like in the paragraph above, so it wasn't really needed there. So it repeats itself a little bit. And I think it also shows about the more about human behavior where people are very gullible. People are willing to believe whatever it is that they see and read. So I think it also is interesting. It's an interesting dynamic in a world where um, there's increasingly amount of like fake news, and now people are generally accepting of the outputs from these LLMs. And it's like, well, of course, you guys need to take an extra step back and you have to learn how to do your own research. But when you have this technology that it's like, oh wow, this is cool. This is like you do research with perplexity. It it gives the feel of like, oh, this is the work that you don't have to do, even though we should always be taking those extra steps to check in. Yeah.
And then, of course, it proliferates, right? So the more and more content goes out onto the web and gets trained on by subsequent models, generally the amount of potential disinformation and misinformation increases.
It's crazy, and I think I just read somewhere that 50% of, like, the internet, it's run by bots,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
is yeah, like, bots account for nearly half of all internet traffic. they're creating like articles are being created by bots. Bots are forming like Instagram, Facebook accounts, and it's so hard to tell what's real from what's fake. And I don't know, it's like an perpetuating cycle.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if I have a hope. It actually makes me worried about the future of where this tech is heading. Like, there's been so many improvements, but I don't think there's been that many guardrails.
Right. That's true. I think in terms of guardrails, probably that's how the large vendors have probably been able to get their models to the state they are, right? Because of the whole RLHF, right? So the reinforcement learning with human feedback, was a kind of big step. The question is just like, when do we get to a point of like diminishing returns?
Mhm.
And maybe we're already there, right? So, I mean, GPT-5 just came out. There's kind of like mixed feelings around, okay, is it really a huge step? I mean, we're certainly not getting anywhere near AGI with this at the moment. And, bigger models aren't necessarily better. And especially, the more and more data on the internet that's either, computer generated or the traffic is just bot traffic, then it's just going to get worse.
And I completely agree with you. I remember when ChatGPT first came out, to me, it was revolutionary, and I actually remember I did a lot of, like, vibe coding, like, with it back in the day, and then Claude came out, and then that's now I'm finding out what the benefits to using certain models over the next. Claude to me is much better when it comes to coding. ChatGPT is kind of like that all-encompassing. It has great memory recognition, like, I'll be like, "Based on what you know about me," and it could, like, repeat things that I told it, like, months ago, and I appreciate that from it. But it's interesting that you say, like, ChatGPT 5, it wasn't that impressive. It also wasn't impressive to me. Um, and it's kinda reminds me of, like, every new iPhone release. Like, when I was younger, I was so excited for the next iPhone to come out because it was a huge improvement, and now the improvements are so subtle where it's like, "Is this actually is this cool again? Is this, like, important anymore?"
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there in what you just said, right? You mentioned vibe coding. I mean, that's another hot topic at the moment. Yeah, good question. Where does it kind of go from here? Now, right? So if basically the large commercial models, it's now just only incremental improvements. Kind of what's the next step, right? And there's a lot of new terms being banded around. Large action models, and of course, agentic AI is the new hot thing. But yeah, let's see where it goes. I think there's a million ways it could go, which is kind of what makes it so exciting at the moment. Uh,
There's a million ways that I could go. What way are you most excited potentially about, and what way scares you the most?
okay, that's super interesting. I think so. If we just focus on agentic AI, for example, now agents have been around. Like software agents as a concept have been around since like the 70s. Um, I think what's exciting probably around agentic AI is it's now we have machine to machine communication in natural language, right? So if you think about that in terms of, okay, what's the use cases of this technology as an enabler, right? So you've kind of got like augmented workers, right? So basically augmenting people's workflows, right? With AI, you've got kind of encapsulating knowledge, this whole idea around, almost an expert in a box, for want of a better word. And then you've got kind of the digital workers, which are basically working with human oversight, or this, human in the loop that is kind of known. So yeah, what's exciting is if you think about machines interacting in natural language, you can, almost drop uh, like a non-technical domain expert into the middle of that conversation, right? Um, right. So there's a lot of interesting things that could happen there, right? Having many machines, humans in the loop, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's super, super exciting just in terms of opportunities for automation, right? is one like obvious example, but I just think the whole human computer interaction element of it is super interesting. What scares me most is probably, again, if we stick with the whole agentic AI concept at the moment, is probably around what we already talked about a little bit earlier, is around the opportunities for mistakes, almost agents going rogue. You hear some, vibe coding horror stories around, the agent basically, trying to cover up mistakes, deleting, folders and data and whatever. So I think if it's not got the right amount of human oversight, then it's also quite dangerous, right? There's opportunity for chaos there as well.
Yes, there is 100% opportunity for chaos. And I have a potentially, dystopian view of where this world is headed. I only because, like, historically, especially in so I'm coming from the POV as from, like, the US. So historically, legislation for new technologies and stuff don't happen until, like, many years after that tech is introduced because you know what? We are capitalist. We want that. We want that innovation, and we want those jobs and whatnot. So I always like to err on the side of caution. So knowing that we have all these quote unquote innovations and improvements happening, and I'm saying quote unquote improvements because, like, as we mentioned, ChatGPT 5 is, like, to me not an improvement over 4 or any of those other mini models that they have. Um, but it always, like, makes me nervous knowing that legislation is so slow and catch up, and it's kind of sort of free reign at the moment. And I'm just like, "Oh, no." Like, I see that happening, and I'm like, "Come on, guys. We should be able to learn from our mistakes." And not saying that this is going to be a mistake because I think it's gonna open up a whole new world for us in ways where I can't even envision the doors that it's going to open up in terms of what comes next. It's a revolution, but I'm always like, "Oh, boy. What might happen from this?"
Yeah, there was. I was reading about a data breach. I think it was last week. I forget the specific news article now, but there was like a big conversation around, was this app vibe coded or not? Right? Like literally, there was like a massive Reddit like discussion around, was this like because it was vibe coded or not? I think it came out in the end that it wasn't actually vibe coded, and just somebody had left like an object store like open on the internet, right? But yeah, it's kind of interesting. Although regulation doesn't um, fix that, like a specific like example like that. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So how much do you want to regulate versus how much do you want to essentially let the economy and companies benefit from the new technology, right?
Yeah, and I think I know which one you're talking
That way.
and I think I know which, the hack that you're talking about. Was it or We're Dating the Same Man app?
I think there's something like that. Yeah, yeah, like a lot of like personal information, right?
A lot of personal information. Someone was very angry, and security is so important, and I there's really no standard. There should be standards team company to company where they should have, like, a security officer or a data governance team, but oftentimes, like, the governance is, like, last. If they're not, like, data driven or they're data illiterate, they don't have those guardrails, and they don't set it up in an appropriate manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it can happen, and no level of regulation is actually going to stop that.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting to think about. I wanna have hope, but I'm also like, we'll see. We'll see what happens."
I mean, it's also an education topic, right? It's making sure that you have, your engineering teams are well educated, your product engineering teams,
No, definitely,
that,
yeah.
you
And
know,
speaking
so and just you've got the right amount of due diligence, right? Within your own companies.
due diligence, patience, governance are all important factors. Security, especially nowadays where hackers are just looking for little gaps in your infrastructure to be able to jump into. I was actually, where are my books? That's actually a conversation for another time. I love reading about cyber attacks and hackers,
Wow.
but that's for another time. So you've led across engineering, product, data science teams. When you're building a product from scratch, which discipline do you think should lead and why?
Short answer, I don't think that any designated discipline should lead, would be my straight answer to that. I mean, whoever has context, whoever has, the relationships and the domain knowledge should lead, right? I think it should be more of a natural thing. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have your kind of silos within your organization, the incentives might not always be aligned. So I think whoever can really articulate the business problem and is probably deep enough in the pain points and friction points should be leading. And that could be somebody with a more engineering focus, product focus, or sales focus, right? To be honest.
No, it definitely makes sense. Like you said, whoever has the domain knowledge, the relationships to actually have that champion be able to distribute the information. There definitely needs to be some sort of project manager. Maybe the project manager should be the lead, or they should do the designated like discovery for that. But many companies, something that I've noticed is that they they're all riding the AI train saying they're AI first, but they actually struggle to ship like meaningful data products. And half of these new like AI companies are just wrappers around current LLMs. What's the biggest trap that they fall into and how can they avoid it?
I think leading with fast iteration POCs and demos, but they have to be grounded in some insight in how they solve the business problem. Right? I don't think you need from the outset, a really detailed ROI quantification, but you should be able to demonstrate with whatever you're wrapping around whatever LLM. Like this is how we're going to create business value right from the start, because everything demos really well. And
Mhm.
then I think part of the problem is that shiny demo gets basically pushed out too fast, and it ends up losing the trust of stakeholders, right? And I think a lot of companies potentially fall into that trap, right? So they go through the whole like talk with your data, like POC looks great, but then when it actually gets rolled out, it doesn't deliver potentially the business value that um, it might. So some kind of doesn't necessarily have to be, like I said, the detailed quantification, but iterate fast, lead with demos, but make sure that there's also a story around, okay, a data driven insight that shows how this is solving a real business problem.
Great advice. And out of curiosity, if you had unlimited resources and no stakeholder constraints, what kind of product do you think you'd build tomorrow?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess that's quite a personal question. What type of product would I build tomorrow? Probably I would focus something around social impact, right? Probably broad topics. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, right? Something around reducing spread of misinformation online, whether that be, fact checking, real time scoring of content. I think that would be beneficial. Probably another very broad topic that I haven't touched or been anywhere near in a long, long time since the research days would be around augmentative and alternative communication devices.
Okay.
Something around, improving literacy, etc. But that again would be more just from a kind of like a personal perspective. The other thing I would love to look at, but I have absolutely no idea how I would tackle it, would be something around reducing food poverty. But I have no clue how that would ever come to light
That oh,
as a technical solution. But there you go.
That would be a spectacular if someone could figure out the right solution for that, that would be absolutely spectacular. Because so I'm based in Philadelphia. The pandemic had terrible, terrible outcomes. The increase in homelessness has been terrifying, and
Right.
it's so heartbreaking because as an average person, I'm like, "How can I even help?" There's not much I don't know what I can do, but that is I mean, I know that this is a global issue, and I don't even know where to get started on that either.
Me neither. But yeah, your question was unlimited resources.
Yeah, that would be it. That would be a good one.
Yeah,
Oh my goodness. So now are you down for some rapid fire questions? We're almost done.
yeah, please do.
All right. What is the first leadership lesson you learned the hard way?
Um, building without the right business context. So the whole, I mean, the classic build it and they will come attitude, right? So cool idea, let's build it, and then really no idea how to either monetize that thing or you know pivot when it doesn't work.
Oof. What is the biggest myth about digital transformation that you've heard?
That the data is all there and ready and it's clean.
It's clean. That's a good one. QAing is it should be more people should take it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I, I mean it's 80% of the data science job, right?
It's 80% of the data science job. What's harder, getting leadership buy-in or team adoption?
Um, team adoption.
Why?
Because I think if you can't get the team around it, you're never going to convince anybody. You're never going to convince leadership.
Okay, fair answer. What is your favorite underrated tool?
I'm going to sound really old, but the Bash terminal.
The best.
The Bash.
What's your favorite LLM?
Oh, favorite LM. Actually, I'm really quite liking Gemini at the moment.
Why?
I quite like the deep research mode and the large context window.
Have you used Perplexity?
I haven't actually. That is one that I have not used.
Okay, so I have a project for you.
Okay,
I would love for you to use Perplexity for a week and then compare it against Gemini and let me know what you think.
okay, I will do that. I will come. I will let you know what I think.
What's one meeting that should always be in an email?
Weekly highlights updates.
Ooh, that is so funny. I just scheduled a weekly highlights update for my team. What is a book or podcast that changed how you think about leadership?
Again, it's another old one, but I reread it not long ago. Seven characteristics of highly effective people. So Stephen
Correct.
Covey.
Okay.
I think you need to be able to manage and lead yourself before others. So
All right. Well, Roz, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated this conversation.
likewise, thank you very much for having me.
Of course.